Okay, this is the next section from the book, The Holy Grail of Wisdom Quotes. We're going to be starting out with Gordon Allport. I actually had like a Peter Allett. He's a professor of a lot of like religious studies and history studies from England, but I'm going to skip that. So again, this is just going through my notes of quotes. Thousands of pages of them is what I have, and I'm going to try to hit the stuff that I think will be useful to the audience. A lot of it is religious history that I was interested in and other history. But I'll skip some of that. I'm going to try to just give you quotes that I think have some usefulness to you, the audience. One of the points of all that religious stuff was America is either going to become more religious or it's going to become more secular. If it becomes more secular, which it is doing right now, it's going to be more and more difficult to hold the population together in a unified form. And what's going to happen is they're just going to have their freedom taken away, and that will be used to get people together. A lot of people don't understand that, but a society has to have a moral code that it agrees upon. It doesn't have to have the same religion, but it has to have a moral code. And if it gives up, the basic traditional stuff, Ten Commandments, love thy neighbor, man's creating the image of God, it's going to be an imposed thing from above. And that's not going to be what people want, but they're not going to have a choice. But anyways, hopefully it won't go there. Okay, Gordon Allport, he lived from 1897 to 1967. He was a psychologist, and he said, love is the greatest psychotherapeutic agent. It's something that psychiatry cannot create. Psychiatry is primarily giving drugs and then electroshock, whereas, what I like about Christianity, even though it's screwed up now in a lot of ways, the idea of man created in the image of God, love thy neighbor, he's part divine, all of that creates the right attitude towards a patient that's going to give you best results. Peter Bregan, the greatest psychiatrist who ever lived, that's what he said too. You have to love the patient. And when I say love them, and I don't have to love them in a romantic way, but you have to care for them enough that you put their interest as the number one priority, not selling drugs, not the standard of care, not any of that stuff. Okay, and then here's a good quote by Carl Rogers. The optimal therapeutic conversation is the ultimate of subjectivity. Individualization, okay? Okay, that kindness really matters. Here's a quote by Louis Walter Alvarez. There's no democracy in physics. We can't say some second-rate guy has the same right, as much of a right to his opinion as Fermi. Yeah, you should have a meritocracy. All this stuff about, decisions should be made on, diversity or affirmative action, all that stuff is a way to just pick favorites, okay? And when they say diversity, what they want is somebody who's easy to control. They don't want guys like me. I'm diversity. I'm Hispanic, okay? No place wants a guy like me around who's very smart, who'll tell the truth, who wants excellence. They want easy to control puppets. So be real careful when you think you're doing something right. A lot of times that's used to get a puppet in place who will do very bad things, okay? Nobody's trying to find talented minorities. They're trying to find ones that are not talented because they can control them. They don't want a talented minority like me. Believe me, I've been down that path more than you'd imagine. Okay, Henri Amiel. I could call him Henri Amiel, but the French name, but we'll just call him Henri. Okay, he lived from 1821 to 1881. He says, philosophy means complete liberty of the mind. It loves only one thing, truth. And that's like Aristotle's quote, the first step to an intelligent conversation is remove emotions. Just be objective, let the other person talk. A lot of times people need a little time to get warmed up before they can really get to their point, so you got to give them a chance. Okay, his next quote. Life is short, and there's so little time for gladdening the hearts of those who travel the journey with us. Make haste to be kind. You might as well be nice. You got to work all day. You got to do a lot of things, and everybody goes through problems. So just be nice. It doesn't cost anything to be nice. Okay, he continues, truth is not only violated by lies, it may be equally outraged by silence. Yeah, a lot of people are silent because they're afraid. Okay. And Martin Luther says, you're not only responsible for what you say, you're also responsible for what you don't say. Okay, Henri Amiel continues. He says, doing easily what others find difficult is talent. Doing what is impossible for talent is genius. To do what is impossible for talent is the mark of genius. Okay. Mozart has a classic purity of light like the blue ocean, whereas Beethoven has romantic grandeur, which belongs to the storms of the air and the sea. Yeah, they're different types of music. Blessed are they both. Okay. Our duty is to be useful according to our powers. You desire the art of living, my friend. It is contained in one phrase: make use of suffering. Yep, and I think Christianity is good for that. A lot of us basically we're half screwed. Okay, everybody's got problems. I got plenty of problems, but I take what little time I have and I try to make the most of it. And I think that's what everyone should do. Find out what you're good at, what you care about, and do everything you can with that. And it sort of like helps you to compensate for the suffering in your life, for the problems, for the disappointments. And a lot of them, they can't be fixed. All that stuff about you can think whatever you want is not necessarily true. It's sort of like the Hamlet quote, nothing is either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. No, a lot of things are real, and there's nothing you could do about them. Hamlet was sad. His father died. I was sad when my parents died. You can't change that. There's a lot of things you can't change. But you sort of make use of what you got with the time you got left and make the most of it. And then like Schopenhauer had said, forget about having a happy life. Focus on a heroic life. Because if you do what you think you should and you really do it, then you like yourself. And that's good. Okay. Let's see. Next quote by him. To be misunderstood, even by those whom one loves, is the cross and bitterness of life. Yep. Okay. For purposes of achievement, this is Henri Amiel continuing. The best approach is narrowness of habit combined with energy of the will. Yeah, pick what matters and go all out with the time you have to achieve in that area. Whatever that might be. That might be to help your kid. That might be to do whatever you think is important and you're good at. Okay. Okay, then he says here, let me scroll this page up. Every despotism has a specially keen and hostile instinct for whatever keeps up human dignity and independence, to crush what is spiritual and moral, what is human, so to speak, in man, by specializing him to form mere wheels of some great machine, instead of forming perfect individuals, to make society, rather than the individual's conscience, the center of life, to enslave the soul to things, to depersonalize the man. That is the dominant drift of our epoch. Okay, so basically he's talking about dehumanizing people, like putting them on a factory assembly line rather than letting them do some creative craftsman type of work. Okay, here's the next quote of him. Sort of like taking a doctor, and instead of letting them talk to the patient and help the individual, forcing them to go faster and faster and faster, generating billing codes, and then talking about productivity and efficiency rather than how many people did we cure this week. Okay, that's what conventional medicine does. At all the Western hospitals, they track productivity and efficiency based on how many billing codes are being generated. The assumption is made everything is a standard of care, rather than talking about how many patients did we cure this week. You will never hear that. Talk to all the doctors you can find. You will never hear anybody say we cured this many hypertensives this week, this many diabetics, this many obese patients. I'm not aware of any place that tracks that. Okay, in the Western world. Okay, here's another quote by Henri Amiel. The test of every religious or educational system is the man it forms. All right, and so I will tell you that that's an example where I have a disagreement with my coach, Mark Schultz, world and Olympic champion. I love the guy. He's a great guy, and he helped me a tremendous amount when I was young. But he's a little annoyed. He thinks some of the Mormon doctrine is bogus. And what I would say about the Mormon doctrine, I don't know the Mormon doctrine. I really don't care about it. Okay, but my experience with the Mormons, I met lots of great Mormons, man. We wrestled them, when I was at Stanford, we wrestled them, and they were like one of the most impressive group of guys you'd ever see. They all wore suits to the, it was a dual meet competition. They had lots of guys who were academic All-Americans. I actually went out for dinner with some of them together, and man, they were really nice. And they were the kind of guys you would want to have your sister marry one of them, okay? They were very impressive. And I've known some Mormon doctors since then, like Ann Osborne. That lady is a super genius. She's like the smartest female doctor I've ever met in my life. And she wrote like the landmark textbook of neuroradiology back in the mid 1990s. It was a masterpiece. It was a work of genius, okay? And she's a Mormon, super nice. I actually ended up writing a book for their company. She was a co-founder, started that company, the Amersys Publishing Company. And it was the best radiology medical publishing company in the world. Okay, so what I'm trying to say is, whatever, regardless of what I think of the Mormon doctrine, they're doing something right. They produce lots of really good people, and I've known other Mormon doctors who I really liked and been impressed by. Okay, next person we'll talk about is Kingsley Amis. He lived from 1922 to 1995. And he said, if you can't annoy somebody with what you write, I think there's little point in writing. So he's kind of being a bit of a smartass with that quote, but it's also been said, I think Jeff Nelson, from VegStore says, if it doesn't annoy somebody what you write, then it isn't really journalism. Okay, so in the sense that, it should have some oomph to it, whatever you're writing about. Okay, Kingsley Amis, he also wrote the King's English, book about proper grammar and stuff, and he says, omit hyphens whenever possible. Yeah, they tend to look kind of lousy. All right, well, we'll go beyond him. Martin Amis, I think he's related to him. He was born in 1949. He's a novelist. And he said, lads don't write novels. Being a writer means you spend at least half of your time by yourself. That's the defining thing. A lad is not a lad by himself. He's only a lad when he's with the lads, the guys. Yeah, you can't be a social butterfly and be a writer. You got to spend a lot of time sitting in your chair, cranking stuff out. And you spend almost half your life by yourself. Yeah, I mean, it's sort of like, I like being a writer because it's what happened to me, and I don't make hardly any money with my writing, but I know my books are good and I like doing it. But with a writer, I think what happens is, I wish I had spent more time in a teaching institution and did more teaching than I do. And I sort of had all this knowledge sort of bottled up, and writing books lets me express it and hopefully help the next generation that comes along. And that's a common thing amongst highly educated men as they get older. They want to teach, okay? They want to write books. Carl Jung was a perfect example of that, because all that accumulated knowledge and experience at least gets put to some useful benefit. But the catch about being a writer is you spend a lot of time alone, But that's okay. I like being alone. I like thinking. I like writing my books. Working gets old. It's kind of boring. I do the same thing every day. But don't get me wrong, I do like a lot of things at work. To be a doctor 3 days a week is fun. The fourth day, you're real tired. The fifth day, you're just exhausted. So I actually think doctors should only work 3 days a week. They would be a lot better educated. They would learn nutrition, epidemiology, and toxicology if they only had to work 3 days a week. Of course, the system will never allow that. Okay, Martin Amis continues. A writer is on the whole most alive when alone. Yeah, you're free to be yourself. Whereas a lot of times in public, you can't really be yourself. Like if you're a doctor, most of the time you're going to be talking to these cognitively impaired people, and you have to go slow and be polite and kind of dopey all day long. You guys who listen to my videos, you're not the average patient at all. You guys are way, 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 way smarter, more curious than that. Martin Amis continues. The only way to get across the road is to be born there. Yeah, there's a lot of things like that too. Okay. Hans Christian Andersen lived from 1805 to 1875, the Danish writer of fairy tales. His best one is The Emperor's New Clothes, but he wrote some big ones. Okay, look at this. Ugly Duckling is great. I used to see myself as an ugly duckling in a sense that I was going to work really hard and get developed, intellectually and with experience and stuff, and someday, be a great doctor or scientist. And that kind of made me happy, that idea, because I had some lonely times, man. It was lonely as anything. Being at Stanford, where there were no women, no parties, and pretty much the same thing in med school. A few exceptions, but not much. Okay, Little Mermaid, Princess, the Pea, the Snow Queen. Okay. He was friends with Charles Dickens, the great writer of the mid-1800s, but he stayed too long at Dickens' house and wouldn't leave, and he pissed him off. Hans Christian Andersen quotes, he says, the wiser a man becomes, the more he will read. The wisest read the most. Okay. Hans Christian Andersen, the emperor has no clothes. And there's tons of things. Our modern world, what's happened a lot is the anti-freedom group, known as the DEMS, they have destroyed institution after institution in the United States. And, modern art is a joke. Ayn Rand calls it the emperor's new clothes. But so have many institutions become that. The public schools have been destroyed, institution after institution. And it's kind of sad. Okay, the next one is Joseph Anderson. Let's see, what does he say? There's nothing that solidifies and strengthens a nation like reading the nation's own history. Whether that history is recorded in books or embodied in customs, institutions, and monuments. Yeah, and Goethe had said too, people are inspired by the efforts and achievements of their ancestors. So that's why history is one of the most valuable things you could learn. And it was Napoleon said the most valuable thing he'd like his children to study would be history. So you learn that. And our history was actually changed. There's a guy named David Barton, he's a great historian, and he said that, in the early 1900s, a decision was made by the billionaires who run the world that they had to not allow Americans to know the true history of the founding of the United States, because it's so impressive that they would be very patriotic if they learned it. So by distorting that history and trying to, change it, like instead of learning the true history of all the great men who founded America, geniuses like Thomas Jefferson and Ben Franklin, and great men like George Washington and John Adams and, Alexander Hamilton, instead they try to say, oh, it's racist, patriarchal, all this BS. To try to degrade people's opinion of the country. You see, a lot of people like to criticize the USA, but how come they don't leave? Okay? People want to come here. You don't see people wanting to go back to their original countries, okay? And that's because America was a much better place. Now, America is getting much worse than it used to be, but still, it was the best country. Everybody from all over the world, when their country stunk, they would come to America. And so that's another reason why it's important to learn about these historical events, and that's also why historical monuments should be preserved. So anyways, that's our quotes for today.